there has been, particularly in the last month or so, some new developments. Let's maybe start with the most recent and then work our way backwards to assess, or is it better to start with the designation of the Iranian National Guard in terms of their assessment, or I should say U.S. assessment, that they're a terrorist organization? What makes more sense? I guess implied in that question is, are we seeing steps to a plan as opposed to just simply random reactions?
No, there's definitely a plan taking place right now being executed, and it's not Donald Trump's plan, it's John Bolton's plan. And John Bolton's plan for the last 20 years has been to start a war with Iran, and now he's probably in the best position ever to be able to execute that plan. He has a president that doesn't seem to understand geopolitics, doesn't seem to be too interested in details, and who has essentially delegated almost all of it to Bolton. There's no Secretary of Defense at the Defense Department that could put a brake on some of the crazy plans of John Bolton, something that Mattis actually did before he resigned or got fired. And at the same time, Trump has already bought into some idea of a maximum pressure on Iran. And within that context, Bolton is constantly selling to Trump more and more aggressive measures, all sold as being part of the maximum pressure strategy, but in reality are now creating a scenario in which war is becoming increasingly likely.
All right. So, I mean, and maybe we should start with just to remind people that, and you literally wrote a book on this, or at the very least, you wrote a book on the predicate. Donald Trump unilaterally stepped out of an international agreement with Iran involving their nuclear capacity and assets that were frozen and sanctions that were imposed upon them. And my sense is that Trump, in stepping out of that Iranian agreement that Obama had forged, that was less about a long-term strategy and more just simply responding to a Republican a point on a Republican bucket list, as it were, and some sense of like, if Obama did this, then I'm going to undo it. But the addition of John Bolton has sort of furthered a specific agenda.
I think that's quite correct. I think Trump came into this only knowing that he hated the Iran deal for no other reason than the fact that it was Obama's achievement, and he was in it to undo everything Obama had done. But did he have a plan for maximum pressure strategy or a plan to go to war with Iran? I don't think so. In fact, I don't think Trump actually wants a war with Iran. I think this is something that Bolton is much more desiring. But as things have evolved, what happened was that the people Trump originally had hired were all in disagreement with Trump when it came to the Iran deal. Everything from Tillerson to Mattis to McMaster, they were not in agreement that the U.S. should pull out of the nuclear deal, and they saw a tremendous amount of negatives with the U.S. pulling out. He eventually fired all of them, and the only people he could hire that were in agreement with him about leaving the nuclear deal coincidentally also wanted to go to war with Iran. Well, and that's not a false link there. Those who were opposing the nuclear deal back in 2015, at least a very large number of them, were opposing it because they preferred war. And now the only ones he could get around himself to agree with him on this were also people who were starting to push him in the direction of war.
Right. I mean, maybe not so coincidentally, right, is the point.
Exactly.
It was coincidental only insofar as that Donald Trump has sort of rudderless. His northern star in terms of these type of things seems to be largely a function of doing whatever Obama didn't do. But there are other people out there, obviously. So, okay. So, all right, with that said, Do you think, or maybe we should go through some of the things that John Bolton, now that we have been living in a John Bolton era, and it hadn't occurred to me, but it makes total sense, obviously, that the absence of a defense secretary means that when we're talking about national security issues, John Bolton there really isn't anyone who, I mean, is there anybody, maybe Pompeo, but is there anybody who is senior? I mean, to John Bolton, is there anyone in or around the White House that is capable, or in, the executive branch, that is both capable of assessing what Bolton is doing, have the experience of sort of within the context of a bureaucracy like that, isolating Bolton and his bad ideas? And I guess the third element would be they have to disagree with John Bolton's desire for conflict with Iran. Is there anyone in the White House who fits that bill?
Not that I know of at this point. If they're there, they have managed to keep themselves anonymous to a certain extent, and that may not actually be a bad move on their part. But no, I think at this stage, this is a White House that is filled with folks who are very much going along with this. And the person who probably is the most known and who probably does have a different view is Trump himself. And that's not to give Trump any credit. I don't think he's against war because he's concerned about the humanitarian impact of it. I think he just thinks that it's something that would be bad for his base and the people who voted for him, who very much seem to view Hillary Clinton as being too hawkish. And remember, Trump was campaigning on the idea that the Iraq war was a mistake. And at first, he did not want to bring the neocons into his cabinet and into his National Security Council. But now he has, because there's so few other people willing to work for him. But the issue that really exists is that Trump's instincts that likely are against war are nevertheless secondary to his impulses. And his impulses are driven by a whole set of other issues. And if you have a very negative domestic situation for him, if you have the congressional Democrats calling in witnesses into Congress and the Mueller probe is continuing, etc., I don't see it as unlikely that someone like Bolton would be able to sell to Trump the idea that, hey, some escalation with Iran will change the headlines.
So, okay, this is fascinating. So we have this, there's this dynamic where Trump right now is shopping around for distractions, and John Bolton, who has made a career of having a desire to get into a conflict with Iran, is opportunistically fitting this into what seems to have been, on his part, a plan. And let's take a break here. And when we come back, let's talk about the elements of those plan, including a terrorism designation for the Iranian National Revolutionary Guard and the expiration of waivers of sanctions, ones that expired in this past week and will expire in 90 days. And then let's talk about how it appears, and I want to get your take on this, that John Bolton is setting up a scenario where essentially he is building a context where war becomes almost putting war on autopilot in some respect. All right, we got to take a quick break. I'm Sam Seder. We're talking to Trita Parsi. We'll be right back after this Ring of Fire Radio.